They tried to shame him with a disgraced alien queen, yet he elevated her higher than all. Daniel had always been someone who believed in fairness, in the quiet power of understanding others before judging them. On the interstellar outpost where he worked, the skies were often alive with the glitter of distant planets, and the hum of space traffic was a constant reminder of how small yet significant each life was. Daniel, a diplomat known for his calm demeanor and thoughtful decisions, had spent years learning to navigate the delicate politics of multiple alien species. He had seen arrogance, prejudice, and fear twist even the simplest misunderstandings into conflicts, but he had also seen respect, patience, and careful listening heal the deepest wounds. It was on an ordinary morning, one that began with the usual briefing reports and diplomatic schedules, that Daniel learned of Celara's arrival. The news was met with whispers, sharp glances, and thinly veiled amusement from some of his colleagues. Celara, the alien queen from the distant and controversial Lyrian Empire, was said to be disgraced. Her empire had faced political turmoil, accusations of mismanagement, and whispers of scandal that seemed to cling to her name like shadows. Many in the Interstellar Council believed she was a symbol of failure, someone whose presence could only embarrass those who dealt with her. Daniel, however, saw none of that in the initial reports. He read through her profile carefully, noting her achievements, her intelligence, and the subtle ways in which she had managed her empire despite enormous pressure. The scandal, he realized, was a story told more by fear and envy than by truth. Yet he also knew that appearances mattered in diplomacy. The other leaders and diplomats were likely to use her as a tool, a living reminder that even the highest seats of power were not immune to disgrace. When Celara arrived, the reception hall buzzed with tension. The air shimmered as her ship descended, sleek and imposing, a design that reflected both elegance and authority. The moment she stepped onto the platform, many turned their eyes away, whispering jokes or shaking their heads in disbelief. Daniel watched her carefully. Her posture was firm, her gaze steady, and there was a grace in her movements that no scandal could tarnish. There was no bitterness in her expression, no desperate attempt to prove herself. Instead, she carried herself with dignity, as if she were already aware of the judgments being cast upon her and had decided not to be diminished by them. Some of Daniel's colleagues approached him almost immediately, their voices low but sharp with judgment. "Why are you meeting with her?" one asked. "She's a disgrace. Associating with her could ruin your reputation." Another added, "The council might allow her to attend, but that doesn't mean we should treat her as a serious diplomat." "It's a trap." Daniel listened quietly, understanding their concerns but not sharing their fear. He knew that reputation alone was a fragile thing, and that the truth often lay beneath layers of gossip, rumor, and the assumptions of others. Despite the murmurs around him, Daniel made his way to greet Celara personally. When he extended his hand, she regarded him with a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and for a moment there was a quiet connection, two beings recognizing something familiar in the other: patience, intelligence, and a willingness to look beyond appearances. Daniel spoke softly, introducing himself and welcoming her to the outpost, mindful of the cameras and the eyes of others who were watching closely. She responded with a voice that was calm but confident, a voice that carried authority without arrogance. The first moments were filled with protocol, formal gestures, polite phrases, the careful exchange of cultural courtesies, but Daniel sensed there was more beneath the surface. Celara's eyes held a depth that hinted at struggles unseen by the public. There was a history there, a series of events that had shaped her into someone both vulnerable and remarkably resilient. He realized that if he could look past the whispers and the shadow of scandal, he might find a leader who had learned from her mistakes, who had the wisdom to guide her people, and perhaps even others beyond her empire. Over the following days, Daniel began introducing Celara to the workings of the outpost. They walked through corridors filled with diplomats and officials from countless planets, many of whom were eager to witness her perceived humiliation. Yet Celara met each glance with composure, never faltering under the weight of their judgment. Daniel noticed how she asked questions, listened carefully, and offered insights that were subtle but sharp. She was learning quickly, but she was also teaching in quiet ways, revealing the depth of her understanding of politics, culture, and negotiation. Despite his growing admiration, Daniel was aware of the challenge he faced. Supporting Celara meant walking a fine line. He could not openly defy the council or ignore the prejudices of others without risking his own credibility. Yet he could not, in good conscience, treat her as less than she was. He made the choice to act with integrity, to acknowledge her talents and contributions while guiding her through the delicate political landscape. It was a strategy rooted in respect, patience, and a belief in the possibility of redemption, not just for Solara, but for anyone judged too harshly by the court of public opinion. The whispers continued. Reports circulated about her past, highlighting the failures of her empire as if she alone bore the blame. Daniel could feel the tension whenever a new briefing arrived. Some of his colleagues openly questioned his judgment, their skepticism veiled thinly behind polite conversation. Yet every time he observed Solara handling a situation with grace or solving a problem others had deemed impossible, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He was seeing a side of her that few others could recognize, and he understood that true leadership was often measured not by perfection, but by the ability to rise above mistakes and to act with wisdom in moments of difficulty. One afternoon, as the two of them walked through the observation deck overlooking the vast expanse of space, Daniel spoke gently. "You've faced a lot," he said. "Most people would let the whispers define them. You, however, seem to carry your own story, unshaken by the judgment of others." Solara glanced at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "It is not easy," she admitted, "but I have learned that how others perceive you is not as important as how you perceive yourself. The challenge is to remain true to your principles, even when the world expects you to falter." Her words struck Daniel deeply. Here was someone who had endured scandal, doubt, and public scorn, yet she had maintained her dignity and her sense of purpose. He realized that his role was not merely to navigate political protocols, but to ensure that her voice was heard, that her potential was recognized, and that her story was not defined by those who sought to shame her. In the days that followed, Daniel arranged meetings, briefings, and introductions, carefully placing Solara in situations where she could demonstrate her knowledge and skill. Some meetings were tense, with colleagues testing her, probing for signs of weakness or incompetence. Each time, Solara responded with patience, intelligence, and an unwavering sense of calm. Daniel watched as perceptions began to shift, slightly at first, almost imperceptibly but unmistakably. People who had doubted her competence began to acknowledge her insights, her careful reasoning, and her ability to remain composed under pressure. Through it all, Daniel remained a steady presence, offering quiet guidance, support, and encouragement. He never allowed the whispers of scandal to dictate his actions, nor did he let the judgments of others cloud his view of Solara. He believed that respect was earned through understanding, not demanded through fear or reputation. And slowly, as Solara navigated the complex world of interstellar diplomacy with his support, the first seeds of trust and recognition began to grow, not just for her, but for the principle that every individual deserved to be seen for their true abilities, not their perceived failings. By the time the first week of her arrival ended, it was clear to Daniel that this was only the beginning. Solara had the strength, intelligence, and courage to rise above the scorn that had been directed at her. And he, in turn, would have to remain vigilant, steadfast, and unwavering in his support. The world might try to shame her to diminish her worth, but Daniel had made a quiet promise to himself. He would not let others define her story. He would help her write it herself, one decision, one act of courage, and one moment of dignity at a time. As night fell on the outpost, the lights of distant planets twinkling in the darkness, Daniel stood at the observation deck once more. He thought of Solara, of the challenges she had faced, and of the long road ahead. He felt a sense of quiet determination. This was not about politics, power, or recognition. It was about doing what was right, about seeing the potential in someone when others only saw their mistakes. And for the first time in many years, he felt the thrilling certainty that sometimes the smallest acts of faith in another person could set the stage for something extraordinary. Daniel knew the journey would not be easy. The whispers would continue, the judgments would persist, and the world would not easily forgive past mistakes. But he also knew that with patience, respect, and unwavering support, Solara could rise above it all. And perhaps, in doing so, she would remind everyone watching that true dignity, wisdom, and leadership could never be destroyed by scandal, only revealed by character. And so, as the stars shimmered in the vast expanse of space, Daniel turned back from the observation deck, ready to face whatever challenges the days ahead might bring, committed to walking this path with Solara, not as a protector or a savior, but as someone who simply believed in her ability to shine when the world tried to dim her light. The days following Solara's arrival were filled with a quiet intensity. Daniel had expected the scrutiny, the whispers, and the judgment, but he had not anticipated the subtle resistance that would emerge even in the smallest interactions. It was as if the world wanted to test them at every moment, to see whether Solara could maintain her dignity and whether Daniel would remain steadfast in his support. Yet each day brought its own lessons, moments of insight, and opportunities for Solara to demonstrate not only her intelligence but her resilience. From the very beginning, the schedule was relentless. Meetings were arranged with representatives from dozens of planets, each with their own political agendas and personal biases. Many diplomats approached Solara with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some could not hide their amusement at her presence, casting side glances at Daniel as if to ask why he would involve himself with someone deemed disgraced. Others were more direct, questioning her decisions, her experience, and even her ability to contribute meaningfully to the ongoing negotiations. Daniel watched carefully, observing Solara's responses and noting the subtle ways she maintained her composure, never allowing frustration or doubt to show on her face. At first, Solara's responses were measured, almost cautious. She listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and offered ideas in a way that invited dialogue rather than confrontation. Daniel noticed how quickly she adapted to the rhythm of the council meetings, how she began to anticipate the concerns of other representatives, and how her suggestions, though subtle, often held the key to resolving complex disputes. It was clear to him that she was not merely surviving in this challenging environment. She was learning, adapting, and quietly asserting her authority. Despite her growing competence, the whispers and judgments persisted. Reports circulated about her past failures, highlighting moments when her empire had stumbled or when she had been politically undermined. Some journalists painted her as indecisive, others as overly ambitious or manipulative. Daniel could feel the pressure building around them, a tension that threatened to overshadow every meeting, every negotiation, and every interaction. Yet he refused to let these voices dictate his actions. He knew that true leadership was often tested in the face of unfair criticism, and he was determined to provide Solara with the space and support she needed to demonstrate her true abilities. One afternoon, Daniel arranged a private briefing with Solara to discuss an upcoming negotiation with a particularly stubborn delegation. The representatives were known for their rigidity, their unwillingness to compromise, and their tendency to belittle any opponent they perceived as weak. Daniel knew that this meeting would be a critical test, not only of Solara's diplomatic skills, but of her ability to withstand pressure without losing her composure. As they sat in the quiet of his office, Daniel spoke candidly. "You will face opposition," he said. "Some of it will be unfair, some of it will be meant to provoke you. The key is not to respond with anger or defensiveness. Listen, understand, and respond with clarity. Show them that your worth is not defined by their judgments." Solara nodded, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I have faced opposition before," she replied. "But this is different. Here the eyes of so many watch every gesture, every word. They expect me to falter." She paused for a moment, then added, "Yet I have learned that expectations are only powerful if you let them control you." Daniel smiled quietly, impressed by her insight. "Exactly," he said. "Control the story by controlling your actions, not by trying to manage their opinions." The day of the negotiation arrived, and the tension in the room was palpable. Representatives from several influential planets filled the council chamber, their expressions skeptical, their posture rigid. Daniel observed them closely as Solara entered, noting the slight shifts in their demeanor. There was curiosity, certainly, but also a lingering doubt that hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Solara began the discussion with a calm, measured tone. She acknowledged the concerns of each representative, carefully articulating her points and offering solutions that balanced the interests of all parties. Her words were deliberate, her reasoning clear, and her confidence undeniable. Daniel watched as the delegates, one by one, began to respond differently. The initial smirks and skeptical glances faded, replaced by nods of acknowledgement, thoughtful questions, and tentative interest. It was a small victory, but an important one. Daniel knew that success in these negotiations would not come all at once. Trust, respect, and recognition were built gradually, one conversation, one decision, and one act of competence at a time. Yet even in this early success, he could see a change, not just in the delegates but in Solara herself. She moved with a greater sense of ease, spoke with a quiet authority, and demonstrated an awareness of the broader implications of each decision that impressed even the most experienced diplomats in the room. As the days turned into weeks, Solara faced increasingly complex challenges. Some meetings were designed to test her patience, others her intelligence, and still others her ability to navigate the intricate web of interstellar politics. Each time, she met the challenge with composure and insight. Daniel continued to guide her, offering advice and support while allowing her the freedom to develop her own style of leadership. It was a delicate balance, one that required trust, patience, and an understanding that true mentorship meant letting someone find their own path while providing a steady hand when needed. Outside of official meetings, Daniel observed Solara interacting with the staff and other officials. She listened to their concerns, offered guidance, and showed a genuine interest in their perspectives. Her presence began to shift the atmosphere of the outpost subtly but significantly. People who had once viewed her with skepticism began to approach her with respect. They asked for her opinion, sought her guidance, and gradually came to appreciate the depth of her understanding and the fairness of her judgments. Daniel found himself reflecting often on the nature of leadership. He had always believed that character mattered more than reputation, that the ability to act with integrity and compassion was more important than public approval. Solara embodied these principles. Despite the shadow of her past, despite the whispers that sought to diminish her, she remained true to herself and her values. Daniel realized that this was perhaps the most powerful lesson of all, that dignity and respect were not given. They were earned through consistent, thoughtful action and unwavering adherence to one's principles. One particularly challenging day, a delegation arrived with accusations regarding past decisions made by Solara's empire. They framed the issues as failures and attempted to use them to undermine her credibility. The council chamber was tense, filled with murmurs and the occasional sharp glance in Daniel's direction. He knew that many expected Solara to falter under the pressure, to become defensive, or to respond with anger. Instead, Solara remained calm. She listened carefully, acknowledged the concerns, and provided context without defensiveness. She explained the complexities of the situations, the unforeseen challenges, and the lessons learned. Her responses were measured, insightful, and honest. Daniel watched as the delegates, initially poised to criticize, began to reconsider their positions. Some nodded in understanding, others asked follow-up questions that reflected genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. By the end of the session, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had begun as an attempt to shame her had transformed into a demonstration of her competence, intelligence, and integrity. After the meeting, Daniel and Solara walked through the quiet corridors of the outpost, both lost in thought. "You handled that remarkably well," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "I know it was not easy," Solara smiled faintly. "It was not the easiest," she admitted, "but I have learned that the only way to silence doubt is through action, not words. If I respond with anger, I feed their expectations. If I act with integrity, I redefine them." Daniel nodded, impressed by her insight. "And you are doing exactly that," he said. "Every day you are showing that character matters more than reputation, and that truth will always reveal itself in time." The weeks that followed continued to test both Daniel and Solara. They faced logistical challenges, political maneuvering, and the constant scrutiny of observers eager to see them fail. Yet through each trial, their partnership grew stronger. Daniel's guidance and Solara's insight complemented one another perfectly. He provided the experience and perspective of someone who had navigated countless diplomatic challenges, while she brought fresh ideas, keen intelligence, and a resilience forged through adversity. Together, they became a team, capable of facing even the most difficult obstacles with calm determination and strategic thought. Gradually, the tide of public opinion began to shift. Reports began to highlight Celara's achievements, her fairness, and her ability to navigate complex issues with wisdom and composure. Journalists who had once written with skepticism now wrote with respect. Diplomats who had initially doubted her competence began to seek her advice. The whispers of disgrace that had surrounded her arrival began to fade, replaced by recognition of her abilities and character. Daniel observed these changes with a quiet satisfaction. He knew that the transformation was not the result of luck or chance, but of consistent effort, integrity, and the courage to remain true to oneself in the face of adversity. Celara had faced the world's judgment with dignity and intelligence, and in doing so had begun to change not only how others saw her, but how they approached leadership, fairness, and respect. As the first month of her arrival came to a close, Daniel reflected on the journey so far. He had expected challenges, but he had not anticipated the profound lessons he would learn alongside Celara. Her presence had reminded him, in vivid and inspiring ways, of the power of integrity, the importance of patience, and the transformative potential of seeing beyond appearances to the true character of an individual. He knew that greater challenges still lay ahead, that the real test of leadership and resilience had not yet come. Yet he felt a quiet confidence that, together, they could navigate whatever obstacles arose. Celara had proven herself capable, insightful, and remarkably resilient. Daniel had no doubt that, with continued support and guidance, she would rise above every expectation, redefine her story, and leave an enduring mark on the interstellar community. And so, as the twin suns set over the horizon of the outpost, casting long shadows across the gleaming towers and bustling streets, Daniel prepared for the days ahead, ready to face the next challenges with determination, insight, and unwavering faith in Celara's potential. For in her he had seen the extraordinary, and he knew that the world would soon have no choice but to see it as well. The weeks passed, and the bond between Daniel and Celara deepened. Their collaboration had grown beyond protocol, beyond duty, into a quiet, unspoken trust. The outpost had begun to see a shift, some small, almost imperceptible changes in perception, but significant nonetheless. Where once there had been doubt and ridicule, there was now a cautious respect. Yet, as Daniel knew, this was only the beginning. True recognition required patience, resilience, and sometimes the courage to confront open hostility. Celara's presence began to stir deeper currents in the political landscape. Some representatives from other planets were uneasy. They feared that her influence, if left unchecked, could change alliances, disrupt old power structures, and shift negotiations in ways that favored fairness over favoritism. These were not empty fears. Celara's intelligence, insight, and unshakable sense of integrity made her a formidable figure. She had a quiet strength that drew people in rather than pushing them away, a quality that made her influence subtle but undeniable. Daniel observed these changes closely. He knew that Celara's rise in competence and respect would inevitably attract opposition. Some factions preferred weak leaders, those whose failures could be exploited to advance their own agendas. A strong, wise leader like Celara posed a threat to their carefully constructed plans. They would challenge her, test her patience, and seek opportunities to undermine her authority. Daniel understood that the challenges ahead were not personal. They were strategic, rooted in fear of change and the disruption of old hierarchies. One morning, Daniel received a message from one of the more conservative delegations. The tone was formal, but the words carried subtle accusations. They claimed that Celara's proposals were impractical and destined to fail, questioning her judgment and implying that Daniel's support for her was misplaced. Daniel felt the familiar weight of tension settle in his chest. He had anticipated resistance, but each new attempt to challenge Celara reinforced the importance of the work they were doing. He shared the message with Celara in private. They sat together in a quiet room overlooking the outpost's central plaza, where ships glided silently between platforms and distant stars shone faintly through the observation windows. Celara read the message carefully, her expression calm. "They are afraid," she said softly, "of what they cannot control. They see my experience and wisdom, and instead of learning, they seek to undermine." Daniel nodded. "Exactly," he replied. "They measure leadership by convenience, by weakness, not by truth. They will test you, push you to make mistakes, But you are ready. You have been ready from the moment you arrived. Solara's eyes met his, and for a moment there was a silent understanding. They both knew that leadership was not just about making the right decisions. It was about navigating the currents of doubt, fear, and expectation, and finding a way to rise above them without compromising principles. The first major challenge came sooner than expected. A coalition of diplomats had convened to discuss a trade agreement critical to the stability of several neighboring systems. They had originally invited Solara as a minor participant, expecting her to follow their lead, to be overlooked, and perhaps to make errors that could be exploited later. Daniel, however, had prepared her carefully. He had gone over every potential scenario, every subtle negotiation tactic, and every cultural nuance. Solara entered the chamber ready, composed, and aware of the stakes. As the meeting began, the coalition representatives opened with pointed statements. They questioned Solara's qualifications, implied that her past failures would compromise the negotiations, and tried to steer the discussion toward topics that would make her appear uninformed. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with expectation and judgment. Daniel watched from his seat, quietly observing, ready to intervene if necessary, but trusting Solara's ability to handle the situation. Solara responded with a calm authority that immediately shifted the room's dynamics. She acknowledged their concerns without defensiveness, providing context for her past experiences and demonstrating how those lessons had strengthened her leadership skills. Her voice was steady, her reasoning clear, and her insight sharp. She proposed solutions that were practical, fair, and creative, addressing the coalition's concerns while remaining true to her principles. At first, some representatives resisted, unwilling to accept that she could navigate complex issues so effectively. But as the discussion progressed, their skepticism began to waver. They asked follow-up questions, listened to her explanations, and slowly recognized the depth of her understanding. Daniel felt a surge of quiet pride. Solara was not just defending her reputation. She was redefining it through action, showing everyone in the room that competence, wisdom, and integrity were not diminished by past mistakes or external judgment. After hours of discussion, the coalition reached a preliminary agreement. It was not perfect, and there were still points to negotiate in the coming days, but the outcome exceeded expectations. Solara's performance had turned a meeting designed to highlight her flaws into an example of her capability. Daniel noted how even the most skeptical observers were now taking her seriously, asking for her advice, and acknowledging her contributions with respect. Outside the council chambers, the outpost was abuzz with conversations about the meeting. Journalists, diplomats, and staff discussed the unexpected turn of events. Some were surprised by Solara's skill and composure, others impressed by Daniel's foresight in supporting her. Slowly, a narrative began to emerge, one of resilience, intelligence, and quiet authority. Solara was no longer merely a figure of curiosity or ridicule. She was becoming a recognized and respected presence, someone whose actions spoke louder than the whispers of scandal that had accompanied her arrival. Yet challenges were not confined to formal meetings. Daniel and Solara both knew that perception was shaped as much by informal interactions as by official negotiations. They navigated social events, informal gatherings, and public appearances with careful attention to detail. Solara learned to observe body language, read the subtleties of tone, and respond in ways that reinforced her authority without seeming aggressive. Daniel provided guidance, coaching her on cultural nuances and the unspoken rules of interstellar diplomacy, while allowing her to develop her own approach. One evening, during a reception in the central atrium of the outpost, a group of diplomats approached Solara with thinly veiled skepticism. They posed difficult questions, tested her knowledge of trade laws, and tried to provoke reactions that might reveal uncertainty or inexperience. Solara responded gracefully, using each question as an opportunity to demonstrate understanding and insight. Daniel watched from across the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the nods of acknowledgement, and the growing attentiveness of the audience. By the end of the evening, even those who had approached with doubt were engaged in thoughtful conversation, seeking her opinion rather than attempting to undermine her. Daniel was struck by the transformation not only in others' perceptions, but in Solara herself. The confidence she displayed was not arrogance, It was a quiet assurance born of experience, preparation, and resilience. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, and each encounter had strengthened her resolve rather than diminishing it. Daniel understood that this was the essence of true leadership, the ability to remain steadfast, to act with integrity, and to inspire respect through action rather than assertion. Amid the progress, Daniel remained mindful of the ongoing challenges. Rival factions continued to observe, waiting for opportunities to exploit mistakes or create conflict. The interstellar political landscape was complex and unpredictable, filled with shifting alliances and hidden agendas. He knew that each success Solara achieved would inevitably invite new tests, and that their journey was far from over. Yet he also knew that they were prepared to meet these challenges, armed with experience, insight, and an unwavering commitment to principles that transcended gossip and prejudice. In private moments, Daniel and Solara often reflected on the journey so far. They discussed strategy, anticipated challenges, and shared observations about the attitudes and behaviors of other delegates. These conversations were not merely tactical, they were also moments of connection, where mutual respect and understanding deepened. Daniel admired Solara's resilience, while Solara valued Daniel's wisdom and steady support. Together, they formed a partnership that was balanced, collaborative, and rooted in trust. One morning, as they reviewed documents for an upcoming negotiation, Solara paused and looked out the window at the vast expanse of space. "It is strange," she said softly, "how easily people judge others without understanding their experiences. How quickly they can dismiss someone based on rumor or appearance." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he replied, "but that is why what we are doing matters. By demonstrating competence, integrity, and thoughtfulness, we challenge those assumptions. We show that true value lies not in perception but in action." Solara smiled faintly. "And yet it is exhausting," she admitted. "Every day we must prove ourselves, not once but repeatedly. It is as if the world expects perfection as the only path to recognition." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Excellence is not perfection," he said. "It is persistence, integrity, and courage. Every day you act with honesty and wisdom, you reshape the story that others tell. That is the true measure of leadership." As the weeks turned into months, Solara continued to rise in competence and recognition. Her reputation transformed from one of doubt and ridicule to one of respect and admiration. Delegates who had initially sought to undermine her began to seek her guidance. Staff who had been hesitant now looked to her as a source of wisdom. Even those who remained skeptical could not ignore the consistent demonstration of skill, integrity, and resilience. Daniel watched this transformation with quiet pride. He knew that Solara's journey was far from complete, that greater challenges lay ahead, and that each success brought new scrutiny. Yet he also knew that they had proven something important, that character, competence, and integrity could overcome prejudice and doubt, that persistent effort could reshape perception, and that true leadership was forged not by accolades but by consistent, thoughtful action. And so, as another day ended and the twin suns dipped below the horizon of the outpost, Daniel reflected on the path they had traveled together. Solara had faced adversity, judgment, and skepticism with courage, intelligence, and composure. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable with each challenge. Daniel knew that the story was far from over, that the greatest tests of leadership and resilience were still to come. Yet he also knew that they were ready to face whatever challenges arose, guided by integrity, mutual respect, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. In the quiet of the observation deck, looking out at the endless stars, Daniel felt a sense of certainty. Solara was not defined by the scandal or whispers of the past. She was defined by her actions, her wisdom, and the strength of her character. And with each passing day, she rose higher, not because the world allowed it, but because she earned it, through courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to integrity. The months had brought change, but also new challenges. Solara's reputation, once shrouded in doubt and scandal, had begun to shift. Her presence was no longer just tolerated, it was increasingly valued. Yet, as Daniel knew well, recognition often attracted scrutiny, and scrutiny could be relentless. The Interstellar Council was a complex web of ambition, rivalry, and tradition. Every step forward was met with new tests, each requiring patience, wisdom, and the courage to act with integrity. The council had convened to address a matter of immense importance, a territorial dispute that threatened the fragile alliances among several neighboring star systems. The stakes were high. A misstep could ignite conflict, disrupt trade, and destabilize the entire region. Celera's role was pivotal. Daniel understood that the world would be watching, not just for solutions, but for moments to find flaws, to reignite old doubts, and to challenge her credibility. He had prepared her meticulously, but even the best preparation could not eliminate the pressure. When Celera entered the chamber, she carried herself with the quiet authority she had cultivated over the past months. The representatives, aware of her growing reputation, studied her intently, searching for signs of weakness. Some were impressed, others wary. Daniel observed from his seat, noting the subtle shifts in body language and the tension in the air. The first moments of the meeting were formal and measured, with representatives presenting their positions, each statement carefully crafted to assert dominance or test Celera's knowledge. Celera listened patiently, taking note of priorities, potential points of conflict, and underlying motivations. She responded with clarity, acknowledging concerns, offering practical solutions, and demonstrating an understanding of the broader implications of each decision. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and persuasive, and she anticipated questions before they were fully formed. Daniel watched as the room's energy shifted subtly, skepticism giving way to cautious attention, doubt replaced by respect, and tension gradually easing as her competence became undeniable. Midway through the negotiation, a particularly influential delegate attempted a more aggressive tactic. He challenged Celera directly, questioning her previous decisions in the Lyrian Empire, implying that past failures made her judgment unreliable. The chamber fell silent, the other representatives watching to see how she would respond. A less confident leader might have faltered, perhaps growing defensive or frustrated. Celera, however, remained composed. She addressed the concerns directly, providing context, explaining the challenges she had faced, and detailing the lessons learned. Her response was measured, honest, and strategic. She did not attempt to shift blame. Instead, she demonstrated insight and accountability, turning the criticism into an opportunity to highlight her growth and expertise. Daniel felt a surge of pride. He had known from the start that Celera's strength lay not only in her intelligence, but in her ability to maintain composure under pressure. He had also recognized the power of integrity, the way it could transform skepticism into respect. As the discussion continued, the delegates' confrontational approach softened, replaced by thoughtful engagement. Others began to ask questions not to challenge her, but to understand her perspective, recognizing the depth of her reasoning and the fairness of her proposals. Outside the formal meetings, Celera's influence began to ripple through the outpost. Staff, diplomats, and officials who had once doubted her now sought her advice and guidance. Her presence inspired confidence, not through intimidation, but through demonstration of skill, knowledge, and integrity. Daniel noticed how interactions that had once been tense and awkward now flowed with mutual respect. It was a subtle but powerful transformation, one that spoke to the effectiveness of consistent, principled action over time. Amid the political maneuvering, Celera continued to demonstrate empathy and understanding. She listened to the concerns of other leaders, offered guidance without condescension, and worked tirelessly to build bridges where divisions had long existed. Daniel often reflected on the contrast between her approach and the aggressive tactics of other delegates. While many sought to assert dominance or exploit weaknesses, Celera built consensus through respect, patience, and clarity. It was a different kind of strength, one that quietly commanded admiration and loyalty. One afternoon, during a strategy session, Daniel and Celera reviewed the progress of the negotiations. "They are beginning to see you for who you are, not for the whispers or the scandal," Daniel remarked. "But the real challenge is maintaining this perception, especially as new obstacles arise." Celera nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I understand," she said. "Recognition is not permanent and trust can be fragile. Every interaction, every decision, must reinforce the truth of who I am and what I stand for." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message. A sudden dispute had arisen between two allied systems, threatening to derail the broader negotiations. The representatives involved were agitated, their anger threatening to escalate into conflict. Daniel and Solara knew that immediate action was required. They quickly reviewed the situation, considering the history, motivations, and possible solutions. Solara took the lead, proposing a plan that balanced the interests of all parties while maintaining fairness and stability. The meeting that followed was tense. Emotions ran high, and the representatives tested Solara's patience and reasoning. Some attempted to dominate the conversation, interrupting or dismissing her suggestions. Others subtly undermined her credibility, bringing up past events in an attempt to sow doubt. Yet Solara remained calm and focused. She listened attentively, addressed each concern with logic and empathy, and guided the discussion toward practical resolutions. Daniel observed the subtle changes in demeanor, the skeptics growing more thoughtful, the aggressive delegates moderating their tone, and the overall atmosphere shifting from confrontation to collaboration. By the end of the day, the dispute had been resolved. The representatives agreed to the proposed plan, acknowledging Solara's insight and fairness. The outcome exceeded expectations, and her role in achieving it became the subject of widespread recognition within the council. Daniel felt a quiet sense of triumph, not for himself but for Solara. She had transformed skepticism into respect through patience, wisdom, and unwavering integrity. In the days that followed, Solara's influence continued to grow. Delegates sought her guidance on complex matters, and staff members looked to her as a source of inspiration and direction. Even the media, which had once focused on her past scandal, began to highlight her achievements, emphasizing her intelligence, composure, and ability to navigate difficult situations. Daniel observed these changes with a sense of satisfaction, recognizing that true recognition was built over time, through consistent demonstration of competence and character. Amid the professional successes, Daniel also noted the subtle human side of Solara. She showed compassion for those struggling with their own responsibilities, patience with those seeking guidance, and humility in acknowledging the contributions of others. These qualities, combined with her strategic acumen, made her not only a respected leader, but also a figure people admired and trusted. Daniel understood that her strength lay not only in her intellect, but in her humanity, a combination that allowed her to rise above criticism without arrogance. One evening, after a long day of meetings and consultations, Daniel and Solara walked together through the observation deck. The twin suns were setting, casting long shadows across the outpost, and the stars began to twinkle in the vast darkness of space. "The world can be harsh," Daniel said quietly, "but you have shown that it is possible to rise above judgment with integrity and perseverance." Solara smiled, her expression reflective. "It is not easy," she admitted. "Every day there are tests, challenges, and doubts to overcome, but I have learned that dignity and patience can transform skepticism into respect, and with allies who believe in me, the path becomes possible." Daniel nodded. "And that is why we succeed together." Leadership is never a solitary journey. It is strengthened by trust, guidance, and shared vision. You have proven yourself capable, not by avoiding challenges, but by facing them with courage and wisdom. The weeks that followed were filled with both triumphs and obstacles. Negotiations continued, disputes arose, and political maneuvering intensified. Yet Solara handled each situation with a balance of firmness and empathy. Daniel continued to support her, providing advice and perspective while allowing her the space to act independently. Their partnership had become seamless, a blend of experience, insight, and mutual respect that enabled them to navigate even the most complex challenges effectively. As recognition of her abilities grew, Solara began to receive invitations to lead discussions, propose initiatives, and represent the outpost in broader interstellar councils. Each opportunity was a chance to demonstrate her competence, reinforce her reputation, and inspire confidence in others. Daniel watched with quiet pride as she accepted these responsibilities, always mindful of the need for balance, fairness, and strategic thinking. One particularly significant moment arrived when the Council faced a crisis involving resource allocation between multiple systems. The situation was tense, with conflicting demands and high stakes. Solara proposed a solution that prioritized fairness, efficiency, and long-term stability. Her plan was met with skepticism initially, but she addressed every concern with logic, evidence, and empathy. By the conclusion of the meeting, the representatives had accepted her recommendations, recognizing the wisdom and foresight in her approach. The outcome solidified Salara's reputation as a leader of integrity and insight. Daniel observed the subtle shift in perception across the outpost and council. Where once she had been judged by scandal and rumor, she was now respected for her actions, her intelligence, and her character. The journey had not been easy, but the transformation was undeniable. As night fell over the outpost, Daniel reflected on the events of the past months. Salara had faced adversity, skepticism, and scrutiny with remarkable composure and wisdom. She had demonstrated that true leadership is not defined by appearances, rumors, or past mistakes, but by consistent action, integrity, and the courage to face challenges with honesty and insight. Daniel knew that greater challenges still lay ahead, but he felt confident that together, they could navigate whatever trials the future might hold. And so, as the stars shimmered above and the outpost settled into a quiet rhythm, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Salara had risen above judgment, transformed skepticism into respect, and shown that true leadership is forged through perseverance, integrity, and wisdom. Their journey was far from over, but they were prepared to face whatever came next, guided by the principles that had brought them this far: courage, fairness, and unwavering belief in the potential of those who dare to rise above the scorn of the world. The day began quietly, but Daniel sensed the weight of anticipation in the outpost. Months of preparation, negotiation, and subtle strategy had led to this moment. Salara was to address the full Interstellar Council, a gathering that included representatives from dozens of star systems, some of whom had once doubted her, others who had openly questioned her abilities. The eyes of the galaxy were upon her, and this speech would be a defining moment, not only for her reputation, but for the future of the alliances she had worked so tirelessly to secure. Daniel watched as Salara prepared in the private chambers, reviewing notes, considering each point, and envisioning the questions she might face. Her demeanor was calm, composed, and steady. There was no trace of anxiety or hesitation, only focus and determination. Daniel felt a surge of pride. The journey had been long and challenging, and yet here she was, ready to rise to the highest stage, ready to demonstrate the wisdom, fairness, and integrity that had defined her actions since arriving at the outpost. When the doors to the council chamber opened, a hush fell over the room. Representatives who had previously whispered doubts and shared skeptical glances now watched attentively, curious to see how the woman they had once underestimated would conduct herself in such a critical setting. Salara walked with confidence, her posture straight and her gaze steady. Daniel followed closely behind, a reassuring presence but careful to remain in the background. He knew that her moment was hers alone. His role had always been to support, guide, and prepare, not to overshadow. Salara began her address with a calm, clear voice. She acknowledged the challenges facing the galaxy, the need for cooperation, and the importance of fairness in every decision. She spoke not to defend herself, but to present her vision, a vision grounded in experience, wisdom, and the lessons she had learned through adversity. Her words were measured, thoughtful, and persuasive, capturing the attention of the delegates and inspiring a sense of trust. Daniel observed the room closely. He noticed subtle shifts in posture, nods of agreement, and focused expressions that had been absent in earlier meetings. Salara was not only speaking, she was connecting, bridging divides, and demonstrating that leadership required more than authority. It required understanding, empathy, and the courage to act with integrity. As she continued, some delegates attempted to challenge her, bringing up previous failures and questioning her decisions. The chamber was tense, but Salara responded with poise. She acknowledged the concerns honestly, explained the context, and highlighted the lessons learned. Rather than becoming defensive, she turned each critique into an opportunity to show growth and insight. Daniel felt a quiet sense of triumph. This was the culmination of months of preparation, guidance, and steadfast determination. Salara was proving, beyond any doubt, that her past did not define her. The choices she made now, with wisdom and integrity, did. By the time she concluded her address, the mood in the chamber had transformed. Skepticism and doubt had given way to respect and admiration. Representatives who had once sought to undermine her were now seeking her counsel, eager to understand her perspective and incorporate her insights into their own strategies. Daniel watched as Celera stepped down, her expression calm but proud, knowing that she had not only defended her position but had elevated her standing beyond what anyone could have predicted. The following days were filled with meetings and consultations, each reinforcing Celera's growing influence. Daniel noted how the representatives, who had once questioned her competence, now sought her input on critical decisions. The media, too, had shifted its narrative. Articles that had once focused on scandal now highlighted her achievements, intelligence, and composure. Headlines spoke of her leadership, her fairness, and her ability to navigate complex political landscapes with skill and integrity. Despite the recognition, Celera remained grounded. She understood that leadership was not about personal accolades, but about responsibility, fairness, and the ability to inspire trust. She continued to work tirelessly, addressing disputes, proposing solutions, and guiding negotiations with a balance of firmness and empathy. Daniel admired her humility. Even in the face of growing acclaim, she remained focused on the work, never allowing pride or ego to influence her decisions. One particularly significant challenge arose when a sudden crisis threatened to destabilize several allied systems. Tensions had escalated, and representatives were on edge. Daniel and Celera quickly convened a strategy session to address the situation. They reviewed the details, assessed the risks, and developed a plan that prioritized fairness, stability, and long-term cooperation. Celera took the lead in presenting the plan, addressing each concern with logic, empathy, and clarity. The council responded positively, recognizing the effectiveness and balance of her approach. This success further solidified Celera's reputation. Delegates who had previously doubted her judgment now expressed admiration for her insight, while staff and allies praised her dedication and strategic thinking. Daniel observed these developments with quiet satisfaction. The journey had been challenging, but the results were undeniable. Celera had transformed from a figure of skepticism into a leader of respect and influence. Amid these achievements, Daniel reflected on the nature of their partnership. Their collaboration had been built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to integrity. He had guided Celera, offered advice, and helped her navigate complex political landscapes, but her success had always been the result of her own intelligence, courage, and resilience. Daniel recognized that true leadership required both preparation and the ability to rise to the moment, qualities Celera had demonstrated repeatedly. In private moments, Daniel and Celera often discussed their progress, reflecting on the challenges they had overcome and the lessons they had learned. "The world can be harsh," Daniel said one evening, "but you have shown that patience, integrity, and courage can transform doubt into respect." Celera smiled, her expression calm but thoughtful. "It has been a long journey," she admitted. "But I have learned that every challenge is an opportunity. Every doubt, every criticism, every obstacle can be transformed into a moment to demonstrate what is true and what matters. The key is to remain steadfast, fair, and focused on what is right, rather than what others expect." Their conversations reinforced the principles that had guided their journey: integrity, perseverance, empathy, and the courage to act wisely in the face of uncertainty. These values had not only strengthened Celera's leadership, but had also inspired others around her. Daniel noted how the outpost itself had changed, how staff, diplomats, and allies had begun to adopt a culture of respect, collaboration, and thoughtful engagement, influenced by the example set by Celera's actions. As the days progressed, Celera was called upon to lead several high-level negotiations, each with complex and sensitive implications. She approached each situation with the same balance of firmness and empathy, listening carefully, assessing priorities, and guiding discussions toward solutions that were fair, practical, and forward-thinking. Daniel observed the confidence she displayed, the clarity of her reasoning, and the respect she inspired. It was clear that her influence was now deeply established, and that her reputation as a leader of wisdom, integrity, and resilience was firmly secured. One evening, following a particularly successful negotiation, Daniel and Celera stood together on the observation deck, overlooking the expanse of stars. The outpost was quiet, the hum of distant ships a gentle reminder of the vastness of space. "You have come far," Daniel said, his voice soft but filled with admiration. "From the moment you arrived under scrutiny and doubt to this, Your leadership is recognized, respected, and valued. You have transformed perception not through words, but through action. Solara looked out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. It has been a journey of persistence and understanding, she said. I have learned that respect is earned, not given. That leadership is not about avoiding mistakes, but about facing them with integrity, and that true influence comes from the combination of wisdom, empathy, and courage. Daniel nodded. And you have shown all of these in abundance. The galaxy has seen what you are capable of, and there is no longer doubt, only recognition of your skill, character, and vision. The culmination of their efforts was celebrated in a formal council ceremony, where Solara was officially recognized for her contributions to interstellar diplomacy. Leaders from multiple systems praised her insight, fairness, and resilience. Daniel stood beside her, proud but humble, aware that her achievements were the result of her own determination and character. The ceremony marked a turning point, not only in Solara's career, but in the perception of leadership itself, showing that integrity and wisdom could triumph over prejudice, scandal, and doubt. In the days that followed, Solara continued to lead with distinction, addressing challenges, guiding negotiations, and fostering collaboration across star systems. Daniel continued to support her, providing guidance and perspective while respecting her autonomy and judgment. Together, they had created a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and shared purpose, a collaboration that demonstrated the power of principled leadership and the importance of recognizing potential where others might see only flaws. The legacy of their work became evident across the outpost and beyond. Diplomats and staff began to emulate the qualities Solara demonstrated: patience, integrity, empathy, and courage. Alliances strengthened, disputes were resolved more efficiently, and a culture of respect and thoughtful engagement began to flourish. Daniel observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that their efforts had created a lasting impact, not only on Solara's reputation, but on the broader systems they served. In private reflection, Daniel recognized the deeper lesson of their journey. Solara had faced scandal, doubt, and skepticism, yet she had risen above it all. Her story was no longer defined by whispers or criticism, but by action, wisdom, and character. Daniel understood that his role had been to guide, support, and believe in her potential. But the true transformation had come from Solara herself, through resilience, courage, and a steadfast commitment to integrity. As the twin suns rose over the outpost, casting light across the gleaming structures and busy corridors, Daniel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Solara had not only overcome doubt and criticism, but had become a symbol of what leadership could be: fair, wise, courageous, and grounded in empathy. Her journey illustrated the power of trust, preparation, and unwavering commitment to principles, inspiring everyone who witnessed it. And so, as the outpost settled into the rhythm of daily life, Daniel knew that their story had reached a triumphant conclusion. Solara had been elevated, not by flattery or favoritism, but by consistent demonstration of ability, integrity, and wisdom. She had transformed skepticism into respect, criticism into admiration, and scandal into a story of resilience and achievement. Daniel's quiet support had played its part, but the triumph belonged to Solara, an extraordinary leader who had risen higher than anyone could have imagined, proving that character, courage, and intelligence could overcome even the harshest judgment. In the end, the galaxy remembered not the scandal that had accompanied her arrival, but the remarkable leader she had become. And Daniel, ever vigilant and thoughtful, remained by her side, proud to have witnessed and supported her journey, knowing that their partnership had changed not only one life, but the course of many systems, setting a standard for leadership, integrity, and respect that would endure for generations.